Well, thank you for coming. And today I want to host this like interview thing so that I can learn a little bit more about you and your relationship with mental health, what you're doing right now.
Okay,
Um,
yeah, I'll be
Thank
led by
you.
you.
So maybe you could start with a little introduction, like your name, what you're doing right now, and yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Alan Flanagan. I am a nutrition researcher. Used to work in a different profession. Previously, I worked in law for about 10 years, and then I moved into nutrition research, did my MSc, did my PhD, and now I work in nutrition research, and I operate a resource for nutrition and medical or healthcare professionals generally, which is a education platform for people to learn about nutrition science and recent research.
Great. Yeah, I've seen your stuff and all the research you put into your work. It's it's mind blowing, and I think what you're doing is really awesome.
Thank you.
How did your interest in mental health start?
I think my own interest, I think probably started, oh, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago. I was introduced to meditation by a mentor.
Mm.
And that became a tool for me to just to help to manage, I guess, stress or any other factors.
Mhm.
And just to yeah just to be able to have that as a as a kind of, I guess, a tool in the toolbox or a coping strategy.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually trying to like take up meditation as well. And I try to do like 5 minute meditation, these like YouTube videos, and I follow along in the morning. And I think it's pretty nice to just like settle in, even just for 5 minutes to just like concentrate on yourself and get the day going.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a nice way to reset, I guess, at different, yeah, when things can get a little bit hectic,
Yeah.
with work or otherwise.
Is there a specific event or like memory when you knew that you wanted to like pursue mental health as a career?
Well, I guess it's important to clarify that mental health isn't my career.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nutrition research is my career
Hmm.
now. Um, there's interest that I have within that of the role of diet in, um, potentially helping to influence mental health,
Right.
but the research there is not particularly strong.
Hmm.
So yeah, my research has all been related to human nutrition, diet, and yeah, I haven't published anything related to even the dietary aspects of mental health. Most of my research has been focused on different areas.
Mm. So how did you, I guess, find your community in the area that you live in right now? You like have these certain people that you like to, I guess, converse about these topics or go to when you're a little bit stressed out?
Well, so I lived in Dublin for most of my kind of university and early professional life,
Hmm.
and then I moved to London in January 2019. So I've been here maybe just going on about 4 years, or just 4.5 years maybe now.
Mm.
But then there's also the kind of the online world as well,
Yeah,
where,
yeah,
because I have a public facing platform,
yeah.
that ends up bringing you into interaction with a lot of different fields. So there's various of my friends that are for example, psychologists maybe or psychiatrists or
Mm.
in the area. And often we've ended up meeting and having a dialogue and I guess developing a friendship
Yeah.
because of their interest in the kind of role of diet and nutrition. And so that's kind of the initial introduction is they're interested generally in diet and nutrition. And then we start to kind of interact online on social media and then conversations really just kind of develop from there.
Yeah. I think social media is a very like double-edged sword where you can definitely find some really good information, but at the same time, there's also a lot of misinformation spread. And how does that make you feel? And where does, I guess, your work come into play in that?
Yeah, I personally think social media now is probably on the whole doing more harm than good.
Mm,
And the reason for that is because it's if you're posting, evidence-based or kind of science-based information, it typically is technical and it also typically comes with a lot of nuance. It's no one really wants to communicate in absolute terms when you're discussing research or otherwise.
right.
And so you're then competing with people who are basically speaking nonsense,
Hmm.
but they're promoting it in this way that's very certain.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
they're giving people certainty in an uncertain world, so to speak. So
Mm,
if we're talking about diet or some aspect of diet, we might say, well, it might be good, or it might, there might be a risk. And we're communicating in this language that's very ambiguous at times, I think, to ordinary people. And basically it means that we can never compete with platforms that are building their reach based
mm,
on misinformation. It's just not possible to compete with that kind of misinformation because you're just always going to be up against the certainty and also the shock factor. People like
yeah.
the health misinformation on social media are very much relying on the kind of contrarian opinions. They're very much
Hmm.
relying on big, bold statements,
Hmm. Yeah.
sensationalist types of statements, and it's very difficult to compete with that. So ultimately, I think social media now is probably just a net negative.
Mm,
Certainly for nutrition information, it's just a terrible, terrible place. And then, of course, the counter argument then is, well, for people that are looking for good information and for people that do want to kind of understand what research really shows, then, if people weren't on social media trying to promote that side of it, then there would just be nothing to kind of counter any misinformation. So,
yeah.
so I do see a positive in that, but at the same time, I just don't think we're ever going to be able to truly outcompete with people who promote misinformation,
Mm,
unfortunately. And then there's just all the other parts of social media that other research is showing, just more from a mental health standpoint, quite detrimental impacts, particularly in
right.
adolescence.
Yeah.
That seems to be the kind of risk differ
Mm,
according to sex. So it's much higher risk in adolescent females than it is in males. And so I don't know that that's necessarily related to misinformation, but it's possibly
mm,
related to all these other factors like social comparison and pressure to look in a certain way or
hmm.
certain views or whatever it is. Um, and I think as well, social media has just had a really damaging effect on our ability to just have conversations about complicated topics.
Right.
Um, and there's all of this polarization that comes with people are just meaner online. People say
Hmm.
things anonymously that they would never say to someone in person.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like in the real world, nutrition is so complicated. There's so many different factors. And I guess social media oversimplifies that. You need that wow factor that so there's like this exercise will help you lose X amount of weight in like 5 days. And that's not really true. I guess they just take the good parts out of everything. And I guess that's what attracts people. And unfortunately, that's not what's really happening in the real world. So it does have like negative impact on people. But at the same time, I'm really glad that there are people like you who are trying to spread this information and trying to make even a dent of change in this world of misconception.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't want to just try and counter every piece of misinformation that comes to
Mm,
light, because I just don't think that's a use of my time. Like I'd rather post positively, so to speak. I'd rather
yeah, yeah.
post putting the best foot forward for what I know about my field and what the research
Mm,
says. And that doesn't mean that there's not a place for people that are using their platforms to kind of react to every little post that comes out.
yeah.
I felt I was starting to feel incongruent with my use of social media, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what exactly it was that was
Hmm.
bothering me. And then I realized it was this reactivity, you know. So
Yeah.
a source of misinformation does a post and it's full of misinformation, and almost everyone that I know that's the kind of evidence-based community on social media
Hmm.
is jumping to produce a reel or some sort of response in 48 hours, and then suddenly everyone you know is posting about the very same topic,
Yeah.
saying the very same thing. And I just thought, I don't know what I'm adding here. So, like I said, and I've had this conversation with peers and colleagues who do this kind of thing online, and I've,
Yeah.
said I really acknowledge that there is a place for it and that they do good with it,
Hmm.
but it's just not congruent with what I want to personally do
Yeah.
anymore. So I veer away now from the myth busting, as they call it, and I just focus on just putting out good information based on what the research actually says, rather than dealing with what someone said that isn't
Hmm.
actually true.
Hmm. I guess moving on, is there anything that you regret or wish you knew about sooner?
Not necessarily yet.
Mm,
I think because I came into the field later in my life, I guess I was slightly more realistic about some of the potential limitations. So for example, because I'm
yeah.
largely in academia and largely kind of promoting, nutrition research and science
Yeah.
education, things like funding to get research is quite difficult.
Mm,
And it can be a precarious enough career in many
hmm.
respects. It's not
Yeah.
a career that necessarily has lots of stability and security, because people are maybe hopping around from one institution to another or from one role to another. But I somewhat at least knew that before getting into it. I knew it came with the territory. So I can't really say there's anything, at least so far, touch wood,
Hmm.
that I regret. I think in terms of more the social media side of things, I think I probably regret my to an extent some of the way that I kind of acted in my early 2016, 17, 2018. I think I took a tone that was very angry and kind of indignant at a lot of the misinformation I was seeing. And I don't know that that necessarily was always helpful, but again, it's not necessarily something I regret. It was just part of a learning curve and a
Right.
process where over time I was able to go, you know what, that's not quite me, or that doesn't quite sit well with me and how I want to operate. So
Hmm.
little things like that. On the whole, not a huge amount,
Great.
thankfully.
Yeah. I'm a high school student, so is there anything that you wish you had known when you were like my age?
I mean, it's tricky because, there's different at different phases in your life,
Right. Yeah.
things are defined a little differently. Priorities are different.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed high school at a lot of levels. I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the friends that I had in school. I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed certain parts of the academic side. I think probably what I now realize, but I was also getting good advice, thankfully, from people at the time saying this
Hmm.
to me, was, the kind of idea, particularly when we get to around leaving high school and going towards university,
Mm,
it can kind of seem like there's a roadmap ahead. And
yeah.
certainly kind of, you always probably tend to know, like I had friends in school that, went straight on to do kind of engineering and became an engineer. And it's just like, that's their whole life. It was as if
Mm-hmm.
it was mapped out at that point. Whereas mine was very, very different.
Yeah.
I was interested in law when I was in school, but I didn't know whether I wanted to study it. So I studied English and history. I studied completely different subjects. Then I went back to law, and then I started becoming interested in nutrition. And then I studied originally my master's while I was in law. And then I ended up leaving law and moving full time into nutrition. So it's like the idea that there was any sort of period along that way where I knew where things were going. And I guess tying it back to some of the mental health stuff, there were periods where the sense of not knowing where things were going or the sense of uncertainty as to what I was doing were quite stressful, where I was worried really a lot about what the trajectory of what my life was going to look like. And in hindsight, the advice that I might give to myself at some of those earlier time points would be just keep doing what you're doing and moving forward, and things will, typically have a way of kind of presenting themselves. There'll always be a fork in the road. And I don't really buy into the very deterministic kind of element of some of that, where people are like, oh, well, all roads led to here. I'm like, no, there'll just come a point where what you've been a little unsure about will present itself more clearly as a choice to be made. And then at that point, it's up to you and I guess people around you or mentors or people that guide you and stuff to help have input to make the decision. But it will be a decision that you make. So I think that would be the advice, would be to kind of, stress a bit less and just keep focusing on doing what you're doing at the time and doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
And putting effort into it, and then just allowing the moment where the choice appears and crystallizes to naturally appear, because it definitely will.
I can definitely like relate to that feeling of feeling like you're kind of lost, and that itself is stressful. Like you're kind of hard on yourself that you don't have this like idea or like goal in your mind at this moment. But I definitely will take your advice, and I'm sure lots of other people can, take your advice and really learn from that and grow. So thank you.
My pleasure.
What is the biggest goal that you had to overcome?
Biggest goal or biggest?
Oh, biggest obstacle. Sorry.
That's okay. I would say the biggest obstacle was probably, having to adapt to new components of moving into nutrition.
Mm,
There were some skills that were transferable from law. Legal writing is very similar to academic writing, and
mm-hmm,
always happy to give presentations because I'd been a court-based lawyer. So, public speaking didn't phase me. So there were all these transferable skills, but there were still elements that were completely new to me. Like, for example, I had never done statistics or statistical analysis before I did my master's. So it was being faced with completely new skill sets and having to learn and apply those skill sets and having to really consciously work to develop a new skill. Was probably what I could pinpoint the most. And I do think that when you identify a challenge like that, once you have a little bit of an idea of what you need to do or the direction you need to go to start to develop those skills, then you can put all your effort into actually doing that.
mm. I guess starting with something so different like law definitely has, as you said, its goods and its bads. So I'm glad that you overcame that and you're where you are right now. Um, how do you maintain your own mental health right now? So I know that you mentioned like meditation, but are there any other habits that you've kind of developed or that help you?
Yeah, so meditation remains a big
Mm,
part of that. I try to make it a daily practice, 10 minutes if I can,
hmm
maybe 15 if I have a little bit more time. Um, But one thing that I've done, especially kind of given that I do spend a lot of time online,
Yeah.
the nature of what I do, one thing that I really started implementing a few years ago that I find particularly beneficial is just having a bit of time in the morning blocked off uh, for reading and relaxing and having really easing into the day. So I'm never
Mhm.
just jumping out of bed and jumping straight into work,
Yeah.
or not having, because I do love to read, and so it's carving out, even if someone didn't necessarily read a lot, but maybe they, I don't know, maybe they practice an instrument or something.
Mm.
It's just this idea of having a little bit of time blocked out where I'm not on social media, I'm not opening WhatsApp, I'm not online essentially. I'm just having this hour before I start my day, which is just for my own relaxation. And I find
Mm.
I come into my workday then in a very different mindset, in a very kind of, I actually, in many ways, especially if I'm enjoying reading something and it's making me
Yeah.
think, of come into my day actually feeling like I've already accomplished something.
Mm.
um, and so it's a really good way of just having some calm in an otherwise quite fast-paced world.
Yeah.
And I think that it really helps me maintain sanity,
Mhm.
when things are busy.
Yeah. You mentioned you like to read. So do you have any like favorite books like when you're struggling mentally or to learn more about nutrition?
Not really. I don't really read that much about nutrition, or kind of
Mm.
my big reading interests are history,
Hmm.
and kind of social and economic and also military history, and then just literature. So I read, and again, because I spend so much of my life, my actual professional life is,
Yeah.
doing nutrition research. The last thing I want to do is actually read a book about nutrition.
Right. Yeah.
Because then it doesn't feel like I'm relaxing. It doesn't feel like I'm reading something for the pure enjoyment of the interest. Although
Hmm.
I'm deeply interested in nutrition science and
Yeah.
research,
Yeah.
but I don't want to. And there aren't really that many good books about it, to be honest. So
Mm.
yeah, most of my reading is my kind of personal hobby interests. And so yeah, I'm usually reading nonfiction,
Hmm.
and I'll try to read some fiction just to balance it out every so often. But I always see a nonfiction book, like I said, usually kind of history or socioeconomic or cultural or
Mm.
literature that I see, and then I'm taken by that. Um, so yeah, so the fiction that I would read would be more kind of literature. I still, um, yeah, from my college degree, I still kept a lot of my books from that.
Hmm.
So I like to read back over things like that. So yeah, it's very much what are the topics that I really get satisfaction from reading, and
Mm.
that's what I read in my non-work life, so to speak.
Right. Is there any, I guess, resource that you use often for researching or learning more about nutrition?
Mostly databases. So
Hmm.
I search PubMed, Google
Hmm.
Scholar, any kind of research publication database like that.
Hmm.
But then, of course, a lot of my public facing stuff is providing that resource for other people in terms
Right.
of an educational platform for nutrition.
Definitely. Yeah. I know that we're nearing the end of this meeting. So I guess what goals do you have for mental health awareness, but also like nutrition in the near future?
Um, I guess nutrition wise, I have some next steps planned for future research. So I'm looking forward to those projects. And then yeah, just continuing to grow the educational resources that provide for others,
Mm-hmm.
nutritionists and dietitians and medical and healthcare professionals. And yeah, on the mental health side, that's a difficult one to say. Like, I think, my friends that work in that area would typically be quite strict now with things like social media, and they would be very much advocating that people have good kind of online hygiene, so to speak, in terms
Mm.
of, not just doom scrolling on their phone, not just trying to be more purposeful with when they
Yeah.
are in apps or in, on social media, and
Mm-hmm.
trying not necessarily to just look at stuff like that immediately before bed, or these little things like that that I personally think are actually quite helpful as well.
Mm. Yeah. The last question I have for you is, what advice would you give to a person who's interested in nutrition, if you have any?
Um, yeah, I think I'd say, keep studying. I think it's a field that when people come out of their undergraduate degree, for example, I think if they're interested at a high school stage, I think it's worth pursuing
Mm.
in, at university level, and studying nutrition and dietetics, or one of those. And then I think, it really is about perhaps thinking whether they want to work clinically, like in a hospital setting, or whether they're more interested in research, or whether they're more interested in working like in the community.
Mm.
But again, I can't, that's going to be different for everyone. So I think it's just being patient and taking the time while they're studying the subject to explore maybe all of those, either with
Mm.
work placements or otherwise. And yeah, I think it's a very varied career. I think the one piece of
Right.
advice I would say is that although people tend to think of it as terms of, again, a dietitian or a nutritionist in the community kind of telling people or helping people, improve their nutrition, it's actually a really broad field. And you could work in public health, you could work in private practice, you could work in a clinical hospital setting, you could work in industry. So yeah, I think that would be my piece of advice, would be just really always consider how broad the profession can be, and
Mm.
and how broad the qualification even can be used.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so that's all I have for today. Thank you for joining me and taking your time. I'm really glad to have talked to you, and I just wish you all the best. And yeah, thank you.
You too. Very best of luck with your project, and I hope it's rewarding.
Yeah, thank you.